think we're probably good to start. Happy Friday the 13th, everybody. Really stoked to have Kevin from Threek here. He's got a presentation that kind of covers some key considerations when doing a token launch. Threek is his new advisory boutique firm, and I'll let him do the rest of the intro and take it away.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Kirsten. And yeah, I'm also very excited to be here, to have the opportunity to talk to all of you here today. Yeah, I think just like before getting into the details and the intro, just if you have any questions throughout the presentation, the talk, just raise your voice. I'm happy to stop and take up your perspective or your questions. So yeah, today I just basically want to share with you some learnings, insights I have accumulated, let's say, over the last couple of years, being most of the time like an operator in Web3 projects, and yeah, just like what I kind of see as also some sort of like best practices around like launching a token network. Of course, it's not the only perspective. I think it's my perspective, and also happy to be challenged, obviously. And though, of course, as always, depends also on the merits of the individual case. But with no further ado, let me quickly intro myself. Yeah, hey, it's me, Kevin. I'm originally a trained tax lawyer, so sounds pretty boring, which then eventually turned, let's say, into a Web3 finance operator for the last couple of years, who took then eventually the decision to go back into consulting. Yeah, I'm based here in Switzerland, so pretty close to the Crypto Valley. Some of you might have heard this expression before. So yeah, basic Crypto Valley, also a bit connected with, let's say, the original seat of the Ethereum Foundation, for example, or still the seat of the Ethereum Foundation. I made my professional way into crypto in 2017-ish, as I was with KPMG. As I said, I worked there as a corporate tax lawyer. And yeah, they formed this practice group, which at that time advised, let's say, the very initial ICO projects on structuring the setups from a tax, legal, regulatory point of view. Yeah, surprise, surprise. If I look back at the list of clients I worked out or advised in that time, not so many are around. So it was a pretty wild time. Then, of course, like, yeah, last crypto before the current one, so to say, I arrived, and I basically took the decision to not continue my career in Big Four and consulting, and basically went into well, the startup space as an in-house guy. My first project there was basically I joined early 2020 Arweave. Some of you might have heard of before, I hope so at least, like the fiercest competitor of Filecoin, for example, significantly smaller, with the focus on providing a solution, a protocol for permanent, decentralized permanent data storage. Was pretty great to join. Arweave at the time, I think it was literally after the closing of the first VC round, as then the investors basically guided them, hey, you should bring on a finance guy, finance ops guy. I took on charge. It was a pretty interesting time because I made it basically to, yeah, then end 2022. So I really got my fair slice of being on board of a project from the beginning of a bull run till, so to say, now looking back, basically at the end of the last bull run. Pretty crazy times. I think stabilizing a project after basically its network launch, after that time, the public token sales they did, right? Really working on operations, also pretty boring stuff, so to say, to just ensure business continuity, but also then how to deal with a sharp uptake, increase in network activity, building out ecosystem function, ecosystem investments, ecosystem funds. Also like, yeah, how to deal with huge appetite of investors coming into the space was super cool. Then towards the end of the last bull run, I took basically also decision to because I was not involved at Arweave around the launch of the network, so to join an Arweave ecosystem project, Kive, which is working on a decentralized data lake built on Cosmos SDK and Arweave. Was super cool. I was able to join them just around closing the last funding round, prepped then the org into an ecosystem organization or transition. The organization helped them to transition in an ecosystem organization. So setting up a Swiss foundation, do the token launch, do listing, and I'm still there as a board member, so still ongoing. But then, yeah, as I learned really that my fascination sits really in joining young teams really relatively early, building out basic functions and functionalities in finance operations. Then there was the opportunity to join SAFE, and there I was basically, I'm still, for the last 12 months, I'm still involved as an advisor over there. And again, like same story, right? There was the spin-off from Gnosis. They had to spun up the foundation, start everything from scratch. The token was generated, created in summer 2022. It's still not yet transferable. So also like a lot of really work on also token utility. I will then also gladly refer to it in a bit. Yeah, so that's a bit like my background, and I basically took now the deliberate decision, effective starting this month, to go back into consulting, because that was always like my dedication to help project great entrepreneurs resolving problems. And now basically my ambition is to just bring in my backpack from the last couple of years into a multiple set of projects. Help them out, but also equally, of course, benefit from the project's different perspective, and also, of course, the multitude of challenges, right, each and every of these projects are facing. So that equips that this overview, these words hopefully equip you with some sort of understanding what's my background. So I'm not a techie. I'm really very well tech trained finance operations guy. And I said, like to just like resolve any kind of challenges on the spot, even though if it's sometimes really the first time and you don't really have a historical data or track record you could leverage in resolving it. So I'm not a techie. I'm not a classic banker or so. Like I think I also like to really put myself at the intersection of compliance, finance, and tech, so to say. Launching your network. Obviously, this is a very short summary of like challenges you will be facing or you already are facing these days. And of course, like I said, like it always depends on the individual project. But I really learned is essentially, and it's here in the header, right? It's this pre-TGE phase if you have a token, or the pre-launch phase if you don't, in case you don't have a token, is pretty important. Because I think it defines a lot of things you basically need to deal with afterwards, which are not actually at all. You can't do any amendments later on, or if it's possible, it always triggers, of course, a lot of extra miles and triggers a lot of distraction. So that's why I say, like, when I look back at all this project, like the 3 I mentioned before, right, there were always like topics in this pre-TGE phase you could have resolved way better, and which would basically also have provided you with a lot of more freedom to operate in the operational phases of your product or your protocol.
I got a question for you.
Sure.
Just the concept of like a TGE, because I think that's even sort of evolved a little bit, right? Like, especially definitely evolved from 2017, 2018, 2019, where TGE was synonymous with a fundraising event around the
exactly launch. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just curious because, like, also, to me, like, SAFE is an interesting example of a token launching in a very different way than a lot of people think, right? It's not just more of the like commercial, like market making going on right out the gate. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that. Like, kind of what do you consider a TG to be today?
Yeah, no, it's a very fair and great question. And if I just look at what we did at SAFE, but also actually at KIFE, right? A TG, so the token generating event, essentially was not directly tied to any commercial action. So it was really literally, like, for example, in case of SAFE, it was literally the creation, the minting of the token. And the assignment, the transfer of the token into certain destination wallets. This was actually it. And it basically took them, it was in July last year. And it took them another 2 months to actually launch the DAO. So factually, and we talk here at Safe at the token, which is currently not even transferable. So we have the TG in summer, we have the DAO, so the use of the governance token, which is the current functionality as it stands of the Safe token, just basically came into effective 2 months later. So, and we don't even talk about any commercial interaction. The fundraise Safe, for example, it was completed in April 2022. So even ahead, so to say, of the TG action. So, and I think what you basically refer to, if we go back to the times of 2017 or 18, where basically whenever the token was, I, for example, recall the details at Arby, right? Like I was not there, but of course I very had to study the corporate or the project's history in very much detail. It was really basically very much centered around the key community sales times, right? And it also like the distribution of the tokens was very shortly after, let's say, the completion of this community sales periods. So there was kind of like also why I think in the past often this expression TGE was used interchangeably with, let's say, the distribution or the sales activities around the digital asset, which in these days definitely does not fall together for various reasons. I would say mostly also regulatory reasons, because yes, you want to create, for example, the digital asset, because even though it's not transferable, it's connected with a voting right, which allows you at least as a token holder, right, to interact in the DAO and leave your mark, your say, so to say. So, but it's not tied directly to any sale or distribution activity per se. Hope that was helpful, and also please jump in if it was too fast or how to say that, like to maybe not clear enough.
No, I think it's a great example that, and just case study in a lot of ways, right? Of course, there's still this continued evolution of the the token and its utility, but launching a token, getting it out the doors doesn't necessarily mean immediate like market making for the token.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
You could be building utility and putting it into the hands of people that are really getting that, like recognizing and utilizing it for the right reasons before you open up the whole dynamic of the actual like pricing and selling and all that stuff.
Yeah, for example, like also another case study would be Kaif, right? Where basically the TGE was in March this year. TGE also meant, and that's why I also have listed it here for proof of stake L1s, so the app chain Ts, right? One big challenge, if you really go with a protocol base like a blockchain stack like the Cosmos SDK, you really need to build this network security layer from scratch, right? That essentially means before you actually mint a token, you already have to build up and basically have syndicated, so to say, the Genesis validator set. This, in retrospect, with regards to Kaif, we all have massively underestimated. It was in the end probably a process. To be honest, it took us about 6 months from inception of building this Genesis validator set until basic TGE. And this is also like something, really depending, of course, on the tech stack you're building, on the individual right case you look at, whether you have this complexity or not, for example. And as I just referred to Kaif, right? March, TGE, we had to build before the Genesis validator set. And then basically it even like was more interesting there. That was just the token generation. The actually protocol, the protocol was operational, but let's say the one of the key features was then just activated 3 weeks afterwards, because like basically there was a loading of data into a pool and it took a while. And so basically for users' perspective, it took then another 3-4 weeks or so to actually really be able to use the protocol from a user's perspective. And then like listing at an exchange was then happening, I think it was June, July-ish. So also here, another example where clearly TG is not equal to market making, listing activities, at least not falling together in a short-term context. You know, of course, like I said, like, right, this is highly indicative, this is overview, but that's why I also like I try to say, look, you might be now here, you're now part of an accelerate program. Of course, you look for get rolling, you build a team, you close your seed or pre-seed, however you call it. You incorporate potentially, or you already have incorporated DevCo. You have your first stab at tokenomics. As a tax lawyer, I always say like it's also the right time to take care of team token allocation matters. Something we can touch point, I think, a bit later on. Then I think at TG or pre-TG, right? It's for me like really, if I look back, be it Safe, be it Kive, as I was involved there at the preps of a TGE, respectively, also the post-TG world. Like for me, it was really a thing for us at that time. Of course, product is super key because also particularly for regulatory reasons, why we all know there should be some utility in place when you go live. So I think it's just like an infunctional or like a non-functional token to be launched, especially I think in the current, I think regulatory environment is pretty a risk. That means equally in conclusion that you need to really have a strong perspective on tokenomics. So that's why I think also what you benefit from here in this program is excellent, because I think what I've just seen, what you do that early in respect of tokenomics, so structured, I think it's massive. Because what I have, and I will not disclose any names, it's definitely not, of course, HLV here, and the consorts, like many VCs I have encountered in the past, they had, for example, I talked once at one project in the past to a GP of a larger investor in the project, and asked him, hey, look, we did some recalibration of the tokenomics because of certain considerations. What's your view? The response was, I don't know. I asked a guy from my old podcast. I was like, dude, like you're GP in a VC fund who does mainly crypto investments, so you should have a firm say on this, right? And this is, I think, also makes it really, it's a pretty big challenge for young teams to really form that early already a very a strong view on tokenomics, because that's one of the aspects which are really hard to change. It's not impossible. You can route it through DAO, but you certainly cannot do it just like, I don't know, in a sec. So, for example, and I don't want to go into details, there's an excellent discussion these days in the Cosmos space happening with Stride and Cosmos Hub, where basically the Stride core team proposed, I think they launched about a year ago, if I'm not mistaken, to basically token swap with the Cosmos Hub token and give up their tokenomics essentially. And yeah, I think this is a pretty political topic, and that's why, like, even like a year after you launch, right, it will be provoking. If you want to change anything with tokenomics, it's like a minefield. It's super political. Also, another topic, of course, pre-TG, you likely spend a lot of time with is just regulatory clearances and legal structuring. What do I mean by that? Especially if you might have started with a DevCo, which is incorporated where, let's say, most of your teams are. Now, like transitioning the setup into an ecosystem, it just takes a lot of time. Yes, of course, they're lawyers, but I can tell you, and that's one of the reasons why I also start my practice in the end, they all operate in silos, or most of them. And I think you really need to guide them. And if you don't do it, you end up with mal-instructed, mal-advised structures. And this is even more painful and can be also like fatalistic, so to say, for the project. And that's why, like, you really need to invest a lot of time, in my experience, which, of course, if you don't have now a full suite of ops guys in your team, which most of the projects usually don't have, it also causes a lot of frictions and distractions. Same listing market makers. I think it's excellent that we also have Chiron, I think, in this program. I think it's yeah, whether you like it or not, it's part of the setup. You need to allocate enough time and also like initiate this talks early on to really be on the safe side, to also make sure that you end up with the right outcomes. And then, of course, right, surprise, surprise, like, yeah, once you're through the TGE, and now maybe also clarifying here, like you have the TGE, your protocol is live, and you also now, for example, listed. Of course, you need to work on the product market fit or protocol market fit. It's the rollout of governance. It's actually the activation of governance. Like a DAO is not just getting born like that. And unlike, for example, like a project like Safe, which has a huge user base from the past, was spun off out of a large organization like Gnosis. Like, for example, with Kive, like really activating this governance, this community is pretty. It's not easy, and you need to do it like with a vision. You need to do it, I think, in an effective way, not just like causing short-term noise, which is not really sticky. Same goes with progressive decentralization, right? You don't want to have just like always the same people working on it. It needs to be really become like more a distributed, but eventually a decentralized network of contributors. Ecosystem, like rolling out grant program, ecosystem investment programs. I think if I ask you, Vince, right, it's so heavily underestimated how complex and how effortsome this is. Like so far at Arviv, but also at Safe, we took the decision to outsource this ecosystem investment programs, for example, to professional investors, because it's nonsense for even a large crypto project to build out your own investment capabilities yourself. I think outsourcing, but that's also like, of course, calling for a lot of efforts. And then last but not least, longevity from a financial point of view is also calling for wise treasury management. I think there are great contributions out there. I think also if you look at protocols DAOs like Lido, I think MakerDAO, contributors like Hazu, I think Kapatsky, they do great stuff. Also like with ENS DAO, if you want to get a sneak peek into treasury management. Happy also to share afterwards like some my perspective, like relevant readings, blogs or other posts. I quickly pause here in case anything was unclear or I was too fast.
That's complicated.
It is, unfortunately. I have kept it relatively simple, this slide, but I think it is factually true that it's complex. It's a jungle of topics you should think about. You don't have to think about though at them each at the same time, but just like what I always like really appreciated for myself, that I just kind of kept noting down that, hey, look, these are topics I should think about. Like basically also rolling up the project development from the back. So basically, okay, let's assume in 2 years' time, what are the challenges I might be facing? And just do basically go back in time, so return to today's world, and try to understand whether there may be also like intersections, dependencies you might not be aware of. I think this is probably this topic. It's huge, clearly, but it's also perfect made for just like a team offsite, like just a team workshop, just like brainstorming about how things will evolve and whether there are some structural dependencies. And
yeah, I'll let you go on, but like one thought of mine is like, I just don't know what I don't know, right? And that's, I guess, why you're around, Kevin, but I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, like I think like always say in the end, that's also I think now a bit the bridge into this slide, right? Tokenomics design. Is it really truly that straightforward? Of course, my view is no, clearly no, because that's tokenomics. And that's why I think so great that you do this program and focus so extensively and intensively on tokenomics, because of course, like, yeah, you have this, I try to name it that way, like this standard allocation decks and the old school understanding of tokenomics is like, okay, you have the team is something like we see it like Safe, Kive, something like 15 to almost 17%, right, of the Genesis supply. There's a reason why I call it Genesis supply. I will let you know in a bit. We have like here, for example, like ecosystem, like at Safe, it's pretty big. It's 60%, right, of the Genesis supply. In case of Kive, it's a bit less than 40%. But wait, we have also like, of course, the DEX. We have also like the developer adoption program. So it's a bit the split up. So ecosystem community. So also we're getting close to to 50%. Investors is also a bit, I think, a topic. Like it ranges between, let's say, in case of a Safe large project with a large supply, it was 8%. So the 100 million we raised was 8% of the Genesis supply. With Kive, a bit more a smaller project, of course, it was a bit more. It was even more than 30%, right? Which then, of course, also impacts tokenomics ultimately. This is, of course, like the start, right? I think there's not much like shocking insights, but like the thing is, well, okay, we have this allocation. So, but like, who actually can, for example, like vote in the DAO, right? What do you do with the foundation treasury, so the ecosystem and developer adoption program funds, like for example, the case of Kive? Should they have actually a voting right in the DAO? Probably not, because like, for example, yeah, that would like further emphasize, like, for example, the centralization, right? If you have then really a legal wrapper like a foundation having such a strong say. How another alternative is, instead of like removing the right to vote in the DAO, is like having, like, for example, in the case of a proof of staking protocol, like foundation delegation programs, this Genesis validators, which then actually can, of course, with a delegated stake vote, but it's then not the foundation, it's like then the validator, so to say.
Kevin, I have a question, especially before we keep going. Taking all of this, I think, I think the big thing, like the big takeaway for me is every protocol is different, and I think there is a freedom for every project to not feel beholden to tokenomic models that other projects have done, because it really especially, it's one thing when you're in, let's say it's in a bull market and it's sort of like, okay, here's a framework for success that's just clearly it's repeatable and there's enough demand that you don't have to like overthink it. But for a lot of projects, I think it is, getting back to like what are like the core pieces, like the fundamentals, and that those ultimately will, if you have those in place, all these other pieces of the like the tokenomics, your token release, it come a little bit more organically, right? So I guess maybe a question that I'd have for you is, what at like that pre-TGE phase, what's maybe like, if you could distill to like the most like the single most important question that a project should be asking themselves at that stage?
Like in the end, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's not this blueprint, right? I think it's probably two things, like allocation of token quotas to different, let's say, network participants, and the relevance and importance of these network participants in the rollout of the network, so to say, right? And that's very heavily tied, of course, also, for example, like also then to things like what's the release schedule, right, of these tokens, because that triggers, for example, sell pressure. If you have a listing, it's very clear indication that, for example, like very traditional airdrops, first things happens, well, like a large part of the tokens sold upon listing are actually, like, for example, like airdrop tokens. So it's meant as a very generous gesture. It's supported by also decentralization consideration, but like it doesn't help you if that basically first thing happens if you go live and listing is enabled, it's just getting dumped, right? So I think it's really about thinking, okay, look, if I slice up the cake, where does it end and how is it used? And where is basically, does it make sense to basically bring it in circulation? And that's also why I mentioned here, like this thing with co-minting, that for example, like instead of having everything minted in the foundation, maybe think about like maybe other entities, players you need in your ecosystem, and make sure that they have the adequate stake in the network from day one onwards to basically be enabled.
Can I ask a question here too?
Sure.
Hop in. So within your, in one slide back, where one of the things we're talking about is looking at, you know, economists, right? In our industry, like we talk about like, okay, like deflationary measures, inflationary measures, you know, what things are gonna, you know, potentially burn rates based on redemption, you know, to manage these things. Within your, that's probably pre-TG, where we're hiring some type of mathematician or economist to kind of work out these models of these scenarios, right? You know, I know kind of addressing stuff for the team, but that doesn't take into consideration the individual mechanics that are either going to mint tokens or release tokens to people, the mechanisms in which they're going to be taken out of supply, and how these things fluctuate based on volume and these different factors, right? Is it common, or did the companies that you worked with previously, where was their focus in regards to, you know, economists working out those kind of simulations in regards to those factors on their tokens? That's probably the most single thing that I'm concerned about, because that's what allows you to deal with all of the potential sell and buy pressure scenarios before you're like, oh my God, I didn't think that this could happen, right? Like, so just curious on how you've dealt with that, if you could provide some insight.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and maybe I hope to this chart, right? Like where basically Hive has an uncapped supply, right? Because like it's really, given the fact it's a proof of stake protocol, it's inflationary. There's also some burning mechanism embedded, which could be activated by the DAO. It's not live yet, but this exactly triggered the same questions here, right? You have some, and it's also like Kai, for example, you have a chain layer, which basically secures the network, and you have a protocol layer, and both layers you have staking mechanisms. So a highly complex, let's say, engine, and we really had to engage pre-launch, like economists. First, we started off really, I can tell you, because like maybe some quick background information. I think Hive was originally an EVM chain, and then basically transitioned into Cosmos. And then, of course, like all this complexity got added. And we had to basically start off in an Excel spreadsheet, just like modeling these dependencies, understanding also like what could be like some sort of a black swan event, right? To the network economics. That's how we called it, right? And not token economics, really the engine economics, so to say, of the protocol. Like, for example, because like at Hive, like the data of the decentralized data lake is uploaded to Arweave, and basically the protocol validators, without now going into details, they need to pay the upload costs in R, but they get compensated by the protocol in Hive. So what if something fancy happens to the R token? It's completely out of control of the protocol. How to basically make sure that the adjusting factors are dynamic enough to react to this. This is exactly what we did. And we started off essentially really in an Excel spreadsheet, modeling things, like did some, let's say, probabilistic approximations. And then eventually we also consulted a researcher at the university, just understanding, let's say, whether there are some core issues at hand we haven't figured out. And this all happened basically pre-launch. Absolutely. I hope that helps you to answer the question you had.
Yeah. So it answers it. My question is like, no, continue to the next thing. If anything, I'll take it offline.
So I can just, it's absolute right thought and consideration to do this at this stage. And I think there are, I think, a couple of very focused, I'm not sure whether they're also part of this program, but a couple of focused tokenomics, economics consultancies.
That's where I'm curious. My next question is like, do we have any in this program, or is there a referral I need to somebody that I should be evaluating outside of it? And I guess that's a question I don't know if I need to ask or not. So I was just curious. That's the thing. So
do we have, Vincent, do we have anyone in our program who is specialized in this activity?
So that's kind of our role at HLV, is to not only design the systems but also stress test them.
Perfect.
in the
Yeah,
scope of-
yeah.
So
Obviously.
it's here.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'm dumb, so ignore me.
No, it's fine. It's a valid question. Just in the scope of the program, though, because it's so week by week dependent, we didn't incorporate that into the design of the program, just because so much to cover around, like, the modeling stuff. Teams love, and they love to look out. But if you don't have a solid design, or if you don't really know, you don't have a first principles approach to how the token is going to interact with the system, like, the modeling is worthless.
Yeah.
So once we have defined the system and how the touch points work, and what we ultimately want to reward and optimize for, then we can fine tune it with stress tests. But that's what we do. Like, and typically, what we're doing in this 6-week program, we'll do over 2 months. Like, we just don't have the time for this to do the full-fledged engagement. But if that's something of interest for the teams, of course, we're available to talk through, like, separate channels about that. But we just don't have the time for it during this cohort.
Yeah, and I think, like, also, to be honest, probably this is also another example where you can talk to a consultant. They will probably charge you also. There are some consultants out there, but they will, for fact, actually charge you a pretty hefty amount of fees. But in the end, it's still no guarantee that there's anything left which can really flip over your tokenomics. Huh? So I think, like, what I see is as crucial that, of course, like, the team internally with its advisors does, I think, a lot of back testing, I think, stress testing of the economics, but also try to basically, for example, like, for example, like complex things like also a transaction fee burning mechanism, right? If that's something you would envision, maybe do not implement it like at inception, but like maybe embed it to the code and have it as something you can activate when you basically also have more live data. Because also one big challenge is, I think, also, of course, you can try to battle test and stress test also these things, like, for example, via testnet. Unfortunately, what I have seen is that often testnet data is not really far off from mainnet data. That, for example, like, I can tell you, like, something archive, right? There was this testnet, and the testnet participation was also then, like, basically very early on tied to some vested distribution of tokens, right? For, so to say, testnet participants. It was kind of an airdrop, right? And we also realized at that point, even though it was vested and still is subject to release vesting, people just came to the testnet to basically farm this testnet airdrop tokens. And that, I think, certainly significantly impacted also the data quality of this testnet, for example, for such purposes.
I mean, airdrops and the go-to-market is like a whole beast of its own, right? So, Kevin, I mean, you brought up a good point around, like, implied sell pressure from the airdrop. But, at least the way that I think about it, like, involving a community claim or airdrop is like a really great marketing tactic for the token.
Yep.
It drives interest. It converts users, gets people excited about the ecosystem. Now, the way you reward them is, like, that's the other side of it, right? And
Exactly.
Having healthy rewards and exploring like different mechanisms, such as locking the airdrop for up to 12 months at a time, requiring people to complete actions to claim their airdrop is another method to look at. I think airdrops get a bad rep because of poor design for the most part. And then another part of it too is, like, when you do launch your token, you want to have some type of activation or sync on day one for the token to absorb some of that sell pressure. And that's something that we advise all of our clients to do when they go through this process with us, is getting the TGE is one thing, but also having a reason to use the token at or near TGE is another big feat to build towards. So there are a few different forces that come to play with your launch and TGE and some of the expectations that obviously you need to think through and design, and it can be a little overwhelming because there's just so many different things that you have to consider. Yeah, just want to throw that in.
Yeah, no, an excellent comment, and I think absolutely right. I don't want to come across here as an airdrop hate, right? It's indeed, like, I think from a marketing and also decentralization point of view, it's very effective. But indeed, it all comes down to design, right? Of how this is actually rolled out, right? And I think in the end, it's really a powerful means to activate the community, essentially. And yeah, I think the sell pressure topic in the current state of markets, it's really not an easy topic. I think it also all depends where you're coming from, right? What was the pricing of your last funding rounds, right? Who actually has participated in this funding rounds? I think like it all comes down, I think also to the details, but like it's really a beast. I think the sell pressure management, I would say, and I would also close having seen now, I think, or seen like one case live and the other one like in preparation. It also, I think, probably needs some. Sounds wrong and unfortunate, but like also timing, a lot in terms of timing, right? I think, to be honest, but like I think, of course, you should try as much as you can to address these concerns, right? Because yeah, the launch, the listing brings you a lot of attention for your project, for your network. Hopping over, I think, to something which is currently going on, and I think certainly also pretty insightful for you guys, is like really the definition of token utility, right? And I think hopefully I can also build some bridge into let's say presentations. I think the presentation rendered on Monday, right? I think with the token action space, for example. Ultimately, as I state here, right, welcome to the greenfield. It's very experimental. You need to be open-minded. Try to use a framework. What I will now on the next slide just like will share with you is how safe does it exactly these days, huh? And you will hopefully also see that I think it's very much in line what you do here in the accelerator program. I hope so, at least. Please correct me if I'm mistaken. Yeah, so basically it's really recommended to use a framework. And with SAFE, of course, as it maybe started off a bit differently than an average project, I think there's really an active community already available. And of course, it made a lot of sense to really make this decision or come up with the decision around token utility through a very active community-centric approach. And this token utility discovery framework, it's relatively generic and simple, to be honest. It starts, and I think that's certainly something you also have done for your project, for your protocol, understanding what's the objective for your protocol, what are constraints, what are things you don't want to look into, the mapping of stakeholders, ranking them by importance, right? Mapping out how value flows between the protocol and these stakeholders via the protocol, also maybe directly, whatever. And what are essentially then optionalities or possibilities around like the value capture mechanisms. And I said, like, I thought like this is an excellent way also to zoom in a bit what currently is going on in the SAFE DAO. And I have shared with you some links to the forum threads where, for example, like this token discovery framework is introduced by Steven. Steven is the protocol designer at SAFE. He is was formerly with Citibank, for example, led there quite some digital assets initiatives for Europe. And also like the submission thread where you see then, okay, what kind of flavors are generated by the community. I also have shared here with you a link to the framework template, which really literally follows this sequence, definition of objective and constraints, mapping of stakeholders, mapping the value flows, and then like thinking about and tinkering about value capture mechanisms. I just basically here as a summary, because that's also something you will see online in the form, like, and that's the current work in progress status. The safe DAO, like basically in midsummer, this process got started. It was centered around the publication of a protocol white paper to basically also cater and activate thinking and provoking reactions. It was shared mid-August by the forum. This was attached, and basically most of the replies in respect of the token utility were around using the safe token for grants and bounties. So basically just use it as a means of compensation. Use it as a reward in the form of, for example, like staking rewards or discounts, so like kind of like a voucher. Using the safe token for the creation of so-called component registries. Would be now a bit, I think, too much to go into the logic of registries. You can look up the safe core protocol white paper where it's all detailed. Or using actually continue to use the safe token just purely for governance purposes. So with regards to resource allocation, which then of course like triggers, and I'm also a bit skeptical here, like, okay, well, if you have a governance token and the governance token is here to going back here, right, to basically mostly decide upon these assets, so especially the 40% here, well, it's exactly filled up with this governance token. So what's the value then, and the value equity story of this governance token? So I think that's why, in my view, definitely needs to be more than just like a governance token for resource allocation purposes. Value alignment also very interestingly, like I think going back a bit like to the spirit of airdrops, right? Saying, look, hey, we need to kind of find a way, like maybe somebody provides to an ecosystem project a safe token, and then in turn, for example, like as a very simple example, this ecosystem project would then airdrop their native token to the safe token holders, so the safe DAO, to just arrange for this value alignment. And then very basically, primitive, so to say, safe is just a means to pay for transaction fees, maybe freemium applications where you say, look, this is a free stack. And then like, if you want to have certain features, better UI, UX, for example, you need to pay transaction fees or certain subscription fees, for example, by the safe token. So just also, this is the current status. Like there was yesterday on the 12th of October. I can also gladly share with that you afterwards this link. There was a Twitter space or X space on the current state of these workings. And yeah, as you can see, it's relatively high level, even like with a relatively large crypto project let's say, token transferability. But it's important that this time is taken. And that's, again, like why I think if I look back at Safe, right, I think probably they would have been happy to be in your shoes that early, to have had the chance and the time to look at this topic so extensively. I quickly pause here in case there are questions.
Thanks for that, Kevin. And we're getting close to time. So I wanted to ask, maybe this is a question to kind of like circle things up.
Yeah.
We're all aware of just like the current state of the market, and a lot of the challenges that Web3 projects are facing, and especially around token launches. But I'm also curious, right? Like I think we've learned from past, crypto winners, bear markets, whatever you want to call it, that there's a lot of interesting synergies and opportunities that come out of those. So I'm just curious, it'd be great to hear from you. What do you see as like the big opportunities for projects, especially ones that are looking towards creating and launching a token in the market today?
Yeah, I think like indeed, like bear markets here to build things. I think certainly so like if for example, like if it comes down to let's say token utility ideas, what I personally find very interesting is to think about like a mechanism, so to say, which pairs on one hand, like for example, relatively straightforward models, like for example, like transaction fees, with, let's say, an accumulation vehicle, which would just like also to ensure legal compliance, for example, which would absorb these fees. And then, for example, there is like a value distribution mechanism to the token holders. This is what, it's not here visible, what's currently going on at SAFE, for example, as well. That basically, well, there could be also like, I think these days, I think also as regulatory rules are clearing up, it's not everything negative, a way to find really, I think, interesting combinations how to generate fees, like for token utility, and how you distribute it also in a legal way. Because like I think that's still like the biggest one of the bigger challenges I personally see, but I have a fundamental bias because like I used to be a tax lawyer, right? Like it's just how you basically distribute this token utility sustainably among your token holders without like triggering like, I don't know, fiscal, legal, regulatory risks and make it not so sustainable. Is that an answer in the direction you wanted to get me? So let me know if I should otherwise approach it from a different angle.
No, I think so, because I think it's a good point, right? There's a lot of, I think we're moving more towards regulatory clarity than we have in the past. But also we have a lot that we've learned from prior token launches and token implementations, right? Like there's so much. One of the things that I think is also really beneficial is like it became so easy to deploy a token that there's just an immense amount of information and case studies and things that we can learn from to inform new tokenomics and token models. And and the fact that you see that still today, like I love the SAFE example, because I think a lot of people would have assumed that for a protocol that big and that so widely utilized, that their token launch would have been something similar to like the ENS launch, where
yes,
or others where it's like goes straight to just like commerciality. Everyone here, you now get some free value because you were an early adopter of this product. But what that protocol has done is really hammering home what is the utility we want for this token, like how do we really drive that and not feeling beholden to one approach to releasing it over another. And I think that's maybe you could say is like one of the bigger things. I think there's also more leeway and more flexibility now because everyone's aware of the constraints in the market from a liquidity standpoint. People understand, and there's more flexibility and there's more room for you to be creative and try something different, without people sort of just seeing it and questioning why you're doing that.
I think it's a good point. I think also like when we think about airdrops too, like again, they get a bad rap, but this last 2 cycles really brought airdrops as a great go-to-market strategy to launch a token. And so during this bear market, I mean, even with the clients that we have now, we're taking a step back and saying, hey, like this past cycle was crazy, but we see the benefits in using a day one claim or an airdrop to incentivize usage and incentivize community. But how do we add on top of that to make to make airdrops more sustainable and to really be more value accretive and value dilutive? And I think large protocols like Optimism and Arbitrum took that approach too. And we're implementing those practices with our advisory clients too, and we'll be doing it throughout the rest of the time with Denarii. But it's a thing that, like, if you guys remember, one of the charts that I had talked about was like the different precedents and token launch over each cycle. And it's like each cycle something like a new meta comes and goes. But after that cycle, I think the best people who build in the space can take learnings from the craziness of the previous cycle and then apply them to be best practices or to iterate on top of them to really create value. And I think we'll see that with a lot of the mechanisms that came about over this last cycle, and hopefully apply them to the tokens that are being built today. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I think this makes a ton of sense, and I fully also agree. Like, for example, like what Optimism did, right, or still does, I think, with this retroactive grants, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the language they use for it. I think it's pretty cool, right? Like that they really go back and check, hey, look, who has actually provided really true value to our network in the past? Who are our backers? Like, who are our users, right? And I think this is certainly also something we also did, for example, at Safe, right? There was an original airdrop, very much also tied to, there was also a community discussion about the allocation criteria, the parameters, and really understanding, okay, look, we want to, well, not understand, we really wanted to do structure in a way that it is ending up with the right users to award them for the past usage of safes. And then there was, like, for example, a balance left, because not everybody claimed the safe token. So we did a redistribution. And again, like, it followed a similar clear process, checking eligibilities and making sure that it ends up with the right audience, so to say, because, like, yeah, that I think certainly also massively contributes to the viability of token utility in the end. Let me quickly then, yeah, I think, like, yeah, the regulatory stuff, like, just here maybe quick statement. Of course, I think most of times, of course, like, regular tensions are seen, and of course it's very relevant in the US. Also, like, just like heads up, right? Europe is also gearing up. UK since last week, so Sunday. Yeah, if you do promote digital assets, especially for investment purposes to UK market, watch out. Europe is coming next year also with some issuance and trading, let's say, regulations when you issue utility token stable coins or stable assets in the European Union, right? You don't have to be incorporated over there. So I think, yeah, it's getting certainly not lighter. There's still a lot of unclarity, I think, in EU with regards to EU MiCA. They still need to issue, like, a detailed guidance, for example. And yeah, I think the regulatory compliance, just like, I think it's the last one. Yeah, just I think it's not really rocket science here. I think probably key message: focus on product and protocol building and development. I think this is core. You should launch when you have something to share, use, and I think that's also when then, like, things like airdrop also, like, and cell pressure management are best served, right? To the extent you can, of course, for example, manage the cell pressure management, these markets. Yeah, just I think we don't have to go into the Twitter or US-based company matter stuff, but I think more importantly, what I see is, like, really be out, watch your community, watch what happens with your token, especially once it's live. Be active, actively monitor your communities, and work continuously with a clear dedication on progressive decentralization, to a clear governance framework on all layers. It will not happen overnight, but it's a process. And I think if you can check all these points, I think then you're already, I think, also, like, walking into the right direction, I would say. And with that, yeah, I think I wrap it up. I just leave here my Calendly link. If any one of you wants to have a follow-up conversation, just feel free to book it. I'm happy to jump on a call. Also, gladly more than 30 minutes. It's just like the standard invite. Yeah, so let me know if there are any questions. But thanks for the opportunity to be here, and yeah, to engage in an interesting discussion. Also, thanks, Jake and Vince, for all your questions, and also all others.